Hi, I'm Susan, and welcome to episode 55 of Susan Stanley Stitch in Time. On this channel, I talk about the material culture of learning to sew in the 1800s, mostly surrounded around cross-stitch, quilting, sewing notions, and methods from that time period. And I also share my projects with you. Welcome. If you're here for the first time, I'm really happy to have you. And if you're coming back, thank you so much. On today's episode, I'm going to answer a question. We're going to take a look at Kentucky samplers and a notion from 1870. I want to share a little bit about an event I attended at Acorn and Threads. I have the next chapter in the First Stitches story of Corus and Phoebe. I have an exciting opportunity to talk to you about and a challenge. So stay tuned till the end. This is a jam-packed, fun episode. I'm glad you're here. Let's go. So the question I had was about this sampler book that I shared with you last time. And this book contained all the little practice pieces that Minnie Simmons had stitched in learning skills. And this was actually, I wanted to clarify, because this was actually stitched, this sample book was stitched by an adult in preparation for teaching children. And the children, there are children's sample books as well. I find them charming. Look at that gorgeous monogram. I need to cover up the doll's face because it keeps focusing on the doll. I want to direct you to a blog, and I've talked about this blog before. It's the blog 2 Threads Back. And this blog, Melissa, the author of this blog, has 2 posts, I believe, and I will link them below, that will show you some more incredible samples from sampler books. Teeny tiny doll dresses, all kinds of delicious things to look at. So I will link that below. And then I also wanted to point out that the American Needlework Treasures by Betty Ring has some sample book pages featured as well. So this plain needlework that we talk about, that we don't always recognize, but that we talk about, is definitely prevalent in all kinds of studies of stitchery, and I wanted to point you in that direction for those of you who are asking. Okay, let's take a look at Kentucky samplers. We have 2 girls that I've crafted for this year, Corus and Phoebe. They are from Kentucky. Corus lives currently in Louisville, and Phoebe lives in Boyette. Now, these are girls that were anonymous girls on the Library of Congress, and I've crafted a story around them. And I want to tell you a little bit about stitching that was going on in Kentucky during 1870. So I was really excited this week to see Katie talking about this beautiful body of work by Betty Ring. And when we talk about Kentucky samplers, there isn't a beautiful body of work like this. And Betty Ring was such the beginnings of such a movement in studying the lives of the stitchers, of these samplers. And I am really looking forward to Sampler Symposium, because I believe there's going to be some in-depth talk about that, about Betty Ring and her work at that event. Nevertheless, you should pop over to Katie Strachan Artisan Embroideries, Katie Strachan's Floss Tube, and watch her and see what she has to say about it. But as I was, thinking about what to talk to you about as far as Corus and Phoebe's, what their experiences would have been like as young girls stitching in 1870, I looked back on 2 lectures that I listened to earlier, probably during COVID, I think. One was given by Kathy Staples. She has journal articles in the Antique Kentucky Samplers, is her website, and she has journal article in the MEDSA journal, which is the Museum of Early Decorative Southern Arts. And I will link all of this below. If you're interested in doing further research, you'll definitely want to go to these sites. And if you own a Kentucky sampler, you would definitely want to let Kathy know so she can, tabulate that and maybe take a look at it, because there isn't a lot talked about regarding Southern decorative arts, Southern, and especially marking samplers. Betty Ring did an incredible job starting the conversation, and her work on early American samplers really focuses on the eastern seaboard and the early colonies, the early states, and the work that was being done there. But, children were being educated all over the country, and we've talked about different methods of education and how they learned to stitch. Well, the same thing was going on with samplers. And, Kentucky was settled by early settlers in the 18th and 19th century, and Kentucky's almost landlocked. And so the people had to travel up rivers to arrive in their desired location, and then they had to take footpaths and trails and horse trails and hunting trails and to settle. And so it was a challenge. Life was not easy. And at that point, Kentucky was split up into 3 regions, and there were forts established. But the earliest sampler that you can read about if you go to this site was stitched in 1791 by Isabella McDowell. Her father was a Revolutionary War hero, and she stitched her sampler while she was in Lexington Fort. So children were being educated even in those really challenging situations. There are several other examples, and can't show them to you. You can definitely go to the site and look at them. Where are the prototypes for these early samplers? We don't know. At least during this lecture, they really had not been uncovered. In 1865, of course, Berlin work started to come in, and it was prevalent in, you started to see more and more of that in samplers. There is an example of Zerelda Cole's sampler. She's the mother of Jesse James. If you know about him, he's a famous outlaw. And so the schools that were established were mostly established by Catholic churches and the Sisters of Loretto. And the children were taught, the female students were taught differently than the male, and the kids were split apart, but the girls were taught French, music, dancing, stitching, and painting. And there were also Protestant schools, and mostly those were started by Catherine Beecher. Yes, that is the sister to Harriet Beecher Stowe. So these girls likely would have been attending one or the other of those schools, and stitching was part of their curriculum. If they hadn't already learned stitching, they likely had at home from their mothers or other relatives. They were going to learn it at school. So please hop over to that website. I hope you'll enjoy taking a peek at that. And like I said, if you know any more about Kentucky samplers, please let me know. So since my last YouTube video, I was able to attend an event at Acorn and Threads in Portland, which is not too far away from me. If it was closer, I'd be in big trouble. But I was able to attend a class with the paper and thread. And it was Vicki Jeanette of Needlework Press and Stephanie of Monahan Papers. And they've collaborated to offer products and events and projects that focus on paper and thread. And Vicki is kind of I don't know, she's been doing a ton with perforated paper. And so it's a perfect collaboration between the two of them. And I will pop in some pictures here. I showed them on Instagram. There were 5 projects, and it was just a lovely, lovely weekend. It's always fun to get together with stitchers. I met new new friends, and caught up with some old, people that I've known. So it was great. It's always great. But one of the first projects was a spool, a needlework spool, and the stitching came from a remnant that Stephanie had, Monahan Papers had received, and I just got a little bit started. It's over one. I decided to do mine in blue using 103, and it's going to be really cute. It has, of course, everything kind of had the Acorn theme. Excuse me. And hopefully you can see that. Let me cover, I've got to cover Althea's face because the camera wants to focus on her face. There was another project that I thought was so neat. It's their take on one of these Berlin work or alphabet chart booklets. And so everything was printed on beautiful paper for you to cut out and create the booklet. It had all the little cross-stitch pages that would go inside. And this is a beautiful paper as well. And Stephanie explained, how she receives items mostly from France, and I can't even imagine the fun she has unpacking those boxes. There were other projects. There were perforated paper projects. I had been to workshops before and hadn't stitched much. I only got a little tiny bit of the basket, but it's a different experience, but it was fun, and I'm glad I tried it. I'm really glad I tried it, and it is part of stitching in the past. This is a lovely project, of course, created, I think, with Acorn and threads in mind, where you stitch on perforated paper to create this acorn. And we had a really fun morning using paper and scraps to create a journal book. Now this is just the beginning. I'm going to layer and layer and do more, and you could get, I made a pocket for the inside. You get totally lost in doing this, and I think it's really fun to work with different medium because it pushes your brain a little bit outside the box. And anyway, it was a challenge kind of getting warmed up because you're in this mode of stitching, and then all of a sudden you're gluing and pasting. But this book, I think, might just be kind of, I might do like a seasonal series and put quotes in. I don't know. I did go a little crazy on the glue. You could hear that. The pages were sticking together. They had gone to the store and found old stitching books that were in disrepair and ripped pages out that we used those. So I'm just, I just started. That was fun. It was just different. It was something fun. And then this was the final project, Peace and Plenty, a sampler, and it's lovely. The frame really did beautiful things to it. So that was really fun. And if you ever get a chance to go to events, I know some people have difficulty getting to. That's why I like to share a little bit so you know what's going on. But it's so worth it. So for those of you who are new, I just want to fill you in really quickly. I've been doing a series this year on 1870, and I'm focusing on early learning to stitch and how children learned to stitch and what was going on in 1870 for adult stitchers, and also just the material culture, what was happening around the world, or this specific area that I focused in on, which is Louisville and Boyette, Kentucky. And my two little girls are Corus and Phoebe. And you can catch up on their story in, I think it starts out in episode 47, and I've broken my videos up into chapters so you can just watch the story element of the video if you'd like, and get caught up on what's going on with them. But I do, as a part of this, I want to create, or at least give you an idea of what was going on as far as notions and materials and tools, and what would have been in an 1870 workbox. And so I'm going to show you a few things from earlier workboxes as we lead up to 1870 and give you an idea of how things may have changed. Just like everything, just because something came into fashion, it doesn't mean that the old way wasn't still being used. And so, you know, just like I wear my old clothes and my new fashions, I guess that's the best way I can explain it. So in 1840, when we looked at Little Mary, if you remember Little Mary from 1840 in St. Louis, she had her threads for her stitching project wrapped in papers. And I shared with you some antique thread papers and my antique silk cabinet that had drawers and actual specific spaces for thread papers. And then I created my own thread papers, which you can do as well. I do have some kits on my website with this special paper that was used, and just explains how it was wrapped. And so your thread would just be wrapped, and you could pull one strand out at a time for use. And I just think that is such a fascinating way to store thread. Now I've created this workbox that I'm trying to, you know, focus on 1840 with. This one is more focused on 1840. I'm now looking at 1870 and finding, oh, things weren't exactly the same in 1870. Now in 1870, you also would have had threads. You may have still had threads wrapped in papers, but by 1870, Stitcher's workboxes contained thread winders. Thread winders had come in. And a great, you know, if you want some good visual on notions, you would want to look at this Antique American Needlework Tools book. And there's a whole chapter that shows thread winders, and I'm sure if you're a stitcher, you've seen them, you probably or perhaps collect them. If you want to see some beautiful examples, you'll also want to look at Katie Strachan's video this week as well, because she's been collecting the gorgeous mother of pearl thread winders that Jackie Duplessis has been putting out. Now, I was fortunate to be able to share a few of those on my website with you. I hope to be able to access more because I think they are just little works of art and treasures. But this is what was used, and depending on your means, your thread winder would have been made out of possibly cardboard, wood. I've seen them made from brass, and then mother of pearl, and you know, more expensive materials, painted with images. I mean, just you name it. People were creative. We like to dress up our sewing work baskets. No, people weren't any different in the times past. But one thread winder, if you don't know about already, is just so unique, and it was actually a game piece, and it came from China, and it was used as a thread winder. These were carved in China between 1700 and 1840, and they were used for scoring games. Now, some of the games I've never heard of. The games that these were used for: Pope Joan, I don't know, I'm not a game expert, Lou, Quatrille, and Ombre. So if you know anything about those games, I'd love to hear from you. So these thread winders, and I'm just going to dump a whole bunch out here on this. These are antique thread winders, and the ladies would go to play these games, and guess what? I don't know who started it, but somebody said, wow, that is perfect for wrapping my threads. And so these, I'm going to hold them up. These game pieces were typically, they were either in the shape of a fish or a rectangle. And they're tiny. You can see they're tiny. Let me see if I can hold that up so you can see it. And basically they would abscond with these from the game table and take them home and wrap their threads, and it became a part of their sewing work basket. Now, why the fish? Because they were for gaming. Good, they meant good luck, fortune. But aren't they delicious? And they're, you know, they are just as delicate and precious as the beautiful mother of pearl thread winders that Jackie created. So this is new reproduction. This is actually an old antique, and they're just yummy. So how did they get to Europe and the United States? Well, basically it started with the East India Trading Company, and when they would go overseas, they would try to find unique treasures that nobody here had seen, because of course they wanted to trade and sell, and so that's how they came. But if you want to outfit your 1870s work basket, you definitely need now to transition and have some thread winders and possibly some of these game pieces. Now, if you want to know more about these, let me know, because I do have, you know, additional information I can share with you. But I did want to update you on an 1870s work box and what may or may not have been in there. I want to show you up close, if I can do this, some other gaming pieces that were just rectangular shapes. And they do, some of them do have etching, but you can see that delicate little, let's see if I pull this back. There's a delicate little raw kind of little jagged edge, which is perfectly indented for your threads. So these are also antique game pieces that were used for thread wraps, thread winders. I'm going to share the next chapter in the story of Corus and Phoebe, and this week it's mostly focused on Phoebe. So if you are listening to this and you want to take notes, that would be great. I'm hoping to offer options for those of you who want to create your own book. It's super fun, and the class with Vicki and Stephanie was perfect because it kind of incorporated the idea of journaling and having some ephemera, paper ephemera, and so it all kind of stitched together for me. So stay tuned to find out how you can learn more about what my ideas are for putting this into a format where that you can download and possibly create your own book. So if you're stitching, just enjoy stitching. I'll read this chapter to you and find out what's going on with these two girls. Last time, Phoebe's father had gone to visit Louisville. He was selling the harvest. He's a hemp broker, and he was meeting his daughter Corus, and Phoebe was home with her mother. So this chapter is chapter 16. It's October 1870, late October, and Phoebe makes a scrap bag and meets a tinsmith. Phoebe patiently waited in the kitchen for Mother to return from the barn. The long shadows were appearing as the sun began to set. Taking advantage of the last bit of light left in the sky, Phoebe quietly stitched on her marking sampler with her favorite doll, Althea, by her side. The lanterns would be lit as soon as Mother came back into the house. The familiar sound of a wagon startled Phoebe. She jumped from the table and ran out the back door. Mother was running from the barn with several grain sacks in her arms. They had not expected Father to return until the next day. This was a good surprise. Hugs and smiles welcomed him home. As Father grabbed a few packages from under the seat on the wagon, he handed them to Mother and Phoebe to carry into the house. Unhooking the mules from the wagon, he led them by their harnesses into the barn to feed and water. The wagon contents would keep. Phoebe was excited as the table was covered with an assortment of packages that Father had brought home, along with the grain sacks Mother had brought in from the barn. There were assorted balls of twine in a paper bag, a sack of salt, and a larger one of sugar. There were other packages of assorted sizes as well. Phoebe was hoping for a piece of hard candy if he had remembered. She arranged and rearranged everything on the table very neatly until her father came back from the barn and hung up his hat. "What in the world are these grain sacks doing in here?" exclaimed Father as he sat down at the table, and Mother brought him a large tin cup of water. Mother told Father about the trouble Phoebe had bringing her sewing supplies back and forth from school, and suggested that she could refashion one of the grain sacks into a scrap bag. It was going to take a lot of fixing to get these weathered and torn linen bags ready for use, thought Father. They had seen many trips back and forth from the mill with their striking monogrammed initials stitched in red. Father remembered the care his first wife had taken in stitching them. It was late, and instead of cold supper, Mother began frying some ham and cutting potatoes and vegetables for dinner. Father reached onto the table and picked up one of the packages and handed it to Phoebe. "This is from Corus," he said. "Phoebe, I need you to set the table," Mother said, and she started sorting through the packages herself, taking some to the larder. "Yes, ma'am," Phoebe said, although she was dying to see what the packages contained. She helped her mother clear the table. She carefully put the package on the chair seat with Althea next to where she would eat dinner. After dinner and all the dishes had been washed and dried by the lantern light, Phoebe carefully undid the knot in the twine and folded back the brown paper that surrounded the gift from Corus. The letter was on the top, addressed to her. Phoebe set it aside to read later. Her squeals of delight diverted Mother and Father's attention. Inside the bag was the most beautifully smooth piece of toweling she'd ever seen, and some deep red linen floss. Mother knew exactly what to do. As Phoebe unfolded the fabric, Mother announced, "This will be the fabric we use to fashion your scrap bag. We can make it the same shape as the grain sack, and you can monogram your initial P on the front," she said. "Can I start now?" asked Phoebe. Mother and Father laughed. "Instead of that, why don't you show Father the progress you've made on your doll quilt?" Phoebe held up the patches she had stitched together and explained how she had carefully put together the half-square triangles. "It looks like you have a gift with the needle," said Father, and Phoebe blushed. "She intends to have it completed by the winter solstice," said Mother. "Her doll Althea needs a new quilt for winter." Phoebe decided to save the letter to read by candlelight when she was alone in her room later that night. When it was time for bed, Phoebe retired to her bedroom with her doll Althea in the crook of one arm and the letter and the candle in her hands. She set Althea down in her doll bed. The bed was a gift her father had built for her when she was born. After unplaiting her hair and putting on her long gown, she set the candle next to her bed and tucked herself under the quilts. Phoebe was happy that Mother had added a few extra as the air was crisp and her toes were cold. She carefully opened the letter and began to read the sweet message from Corus. When she was done, she tucked the letter under the candle holder and blew out the flame. The next morning was a Saturday. Phoebe was glad to have Father home, and with the change in the weather, she started to think about winter and holidays. Father was outside cleaning the wagon, and Mother was helping unload additional supplies. There was a loud shout, and Phoebe looked out the window. She saw Mother and Father talking to a tall gentleman wearing a straw hat. He was covered with ropes that draped over his shoulders and held various tools and cookware items. She wasn't sure if she should go outside or not when she heard Mother calling her to come. She was introduced to the gentleman. Father said he was a traveling tinsmith that Father had met on the trip home from Louisville. Father had asked him to come to the farm to repair a few tools and fashion some items for the kitchen. Father said his wife could use a few quilting templates, to which the gentleman nodded. "You want to show me those tools?" he asked. "Come along, Phoebe," said Mother. "It's time to start the supper." She and Phoebe returned to the house while Father and the traveling tinsmith headed to the barn. So as you can see from that little historical fiction story, the tinsmith, the itinerant tinsmith, was still making his rounds, just like in 1840. Instead of riding on a steamboat up the Mississippi, like the tinsmiths would do to reach St. Louis for Merry 1840, these itinerant tinsmiths would walk or ride or carry a wagon from town to town with their wares hanging around their neck, or and the tools to fashion custom orders. So that was still going on in 1870, and I will talk more about how that relates to sewing notions and items soon. But I did want to share with you the grain sack, which was also something that was used in 1870. And I have two antique examples to share with you. These have been well worn and well used. They're huge, but the main part I want to share with you is the embroidered monogram, because these would be taken to the grain mill, thrown somewhere. Let's see if I can cover up her face and here it is. Okay. And it is woven from beautiful linen that is just soft and supple, and probably I could wear this linen. It's just fabulous, probably from all the use. You can see there was a tie up here at some point that came out, and these were just like big potato sacks. And the grain would be thrown in, and then you could go reclaim your bag after your sack, after it had been filled with the product that you were looking for, and then you would either pay at that time, or they would keep a tab. This next one is huge, but has the most beautiful weave. So here's the stitching. Of course, the stitching, the monogram, was so that you'd know whose was whose. This one ties up at the top, has a pull up at the top, and you would tie it. But look at how big this is, and it is a little coarser woven linen, and linen was what was used for these grain sacks. And hemp was one of the major products in Kentucky at that time, and so it would have been hemp seeds, grains, milled items, unmilled items would have been carried in these. So I wanted you to see that, because that was the impetus for Mother bringing in grain sacks for Farabee's scrap bag. So I always like to share educational opportunities with you, and there is a symposium on historical dress coming up in Williamsburg. It's November 14th through 16th. You can attend, it likely is sold out by now, but you can attend in person if you're fortunate enough to be in that area or want to travel there. But you can also attend via Zoom. And I would encourage you to sign up for this if fabric, textiles, and the history of making and the material culture of making during the early American time throughout actually throughout the 19th century. If that's of interest to you, I think you will enjoy this very, very much. It's a symposium on collections, collecting, and collaborations. And it's sure to be a really, really great event. I'll just share this with you, and I will link it below. You can read more about it on their website. So take advantage of that if that's something that you'd like to study. I love the fact that we have Zoom now because we can access so much just from the comfort of our home. We don't have the expense of travel, and we can just learn so much. We get an inside peek at lectures and at museum contents. It's just fantastic. So I do have more exciting things coming up. I know many of you are working on your Corus quilt, and I was so excited when I went to Acorn and Threads to see Christine's progress. Phoebe has a project coming that I will be announcing soon. Stay tuned. Lots of happenings here at Susan Stanley Stitch in Time. Now, you haven't heard from Lou and Sue in a while, but I want to share that there's some new merchandise coming soon from Lou and Sue. It's a sewing case, and the sewing case contains the infamous thread pockets. So this is a perfect, right here are the pockets worked into the inside edge of the case. This is fantastic for cross stitch project. You can line all your threads up. Let me show you this one. See the threads in there? So the threads are lined up in this rim, and your project can sit in here and all your tools, and this is it. It's a one-stop shop. More information on these will be coming via my newsletter, and they will be limited editions. They will be pre-orders, and if you're interested, stay tuned. That's something exciting coming up as well. So I am so delighted to meet with you today. I'm always excited to share the next chapter in the story of these girls. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for your interest in the people who came before us and how they made and did things. Some of you have really embraced that idea and wanted to try using just the very basic tools that were available to stitchers, quilters, cross stitchers in earlier time periods. And if you want to try that for part of the project and then move into more contemporary tools because you just don't want to endure that, you're perfectly welcome to do that. There's no rules here. It's just an opportunity to experience the past. And so thank you for joining me and being a part of it, like I said. And I will see you next time with more exciting announcements. We're heading towards some big things here that I am really delighted to be able to share with you. So until then, make time for stitching, my friends. I'll see you soon.